In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So a few people came up to me after the last discussion. Some excellent conversations were had, and I think most of them revolved around the idea of how, while all of these things that we're discussing seem to be true, it doesn't deny the fact that it's extremely difficult to actually be bold. And I want you to know that it's not because we are saying that something is necessary that we're making the assumption that something is easy. I think anybody would be lying to you if they told you that to be a Christian meant that this is something that's comfortable and won't create awkwardness and that it will be something that easily comes to you. On the contrary, I think the reason why we're having this discussion is because we know for a fact that it is very difficult and it comes at a cost. The conversations that I want to have with you right now is for us to be able to actually see how we can actually put this in practice. We understand the theory, most of us agree with the theory. And I say most of us because obviously many of us are still struggling with certain points. But how to actually take the theory and apply it in our day-to-day lives might not be so obvious. And so allow me today, for this next part, over the next 45 minutes or so, to be able to give us 4 case studies. I'm going to create scenarios, and I'm going to present them to you. But for this to work, I'm going to need you guys to be a little bit more interactive. So when I ask, what would you do? I really would love to hear from you. Raise your hand, participate, just so that this next part can actually be fruitful for all of us. Because we want to know, how do we put this into practice in actual scenarios? Not in fictional scenarios that we'll probably never run into. I'm going to present you with 4 case studies that I really believe most of us will encounter at some point in our adult lives. So, before we do that, today's talk, or this talk specifically, is entitled The Cost of Boldness. But let's be just a little bit clear on whether or not this is actually the calling. I'm going to present you with a few passages from Scripture that I believe make the point extremely clear. There's no getting around it. That the fact that the Lord wants us to be brave and bold and to speak the truth and to follow His ways, and He promises that He will not leave us. You see, He doesn't promise that the world will not turn its back on Him. He does not promise that it will be comfortable. On the contrary, He guarantees that most probably there will be some sort of suffering or pain. But He guarantees that He will not leave us. Listen to some of these passages. Joshua 1, verse 9. Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. This is spoken to Joshua right after who dies? Moses. After Moses dies. You guys have to understand, Moses is a big deal. Moses is the guy that the Lord chose to be able to go stand in front of Pharaoh. Pharaoh, who was considered to be a deity. You understand that when ancient Egyptians dealt with Pharaoh, he was considered a god-man among them. And he would go stand before him, and after killing all of his livestock, and after sending the locusts, and after the frogs invaded, and after the darkness over the land, after all of these things, Moses doesn't shy away from standing up in front of Pharaoh. And so Moses, in the eyes of Israel, is a big deal. Now Moses dies, and God turns to Joshua and he goes, Yalla, alik ad-dur. It's you now, you're up. It's up to you now to actually lead the people. If I were Joshua, I would freak out. When they left Egypt, there were 600,000 men, not including the women and the children and the millions of livestock. And now they're going into wars, and God is telling Joshua, you're going to meet enemies. And if they are diplomatic with you, great. We will live among them and we will win them over for the kingdom. But if they are not, you will go to war and I will stand with you. And as I was with Moses, so also I will be with you. If God is willing to speak those words to Joshua, you don't think He's going to speak it to you now that you have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit within you? Be strong and of good courage, He says. Hebrews 3, verse 16, St. Paul says, so we may be bold, says the Lord, that the Lord is my helper and I will not fear. What can man do to me? Well, I can name a few things. I can name a few things that people will do to me. You think St. Paul is ignorant to what man can do to him? No. He's fully aware of what the world may do to him. But what he is saying is, what is that compared to the gain of the kingdom? What is that in comparison to eternity? What can man do to me? 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Again, St. Paul in Romans chapter 12. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. 1 Corinthians 16. Watch, stand fast in the faith. Be brave, be strong. Let all that you do be done with love. And then finally, Deuteronomy 31. The same sentence repeated by the Lord. Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord your God, He is the one who goes with you. He will not leave you, nor forsake you. When you read these verses, when Scripture is this clear, you almost get the impression that the Lord is telling us, according to today's standards, I want you to be politically incorrect. According to today's standards. Again, please keep this in the back of your mind. The original purpose of political correctness, it really just sounded like Christianity. Be kind. Be considerate. Realize that the person in front of you might be offended, and speak kindly and lovingly. This was the original purpose of political correctness. So Christians felt like, okay, so just be Christian. Today, that's not what it means. And so by today's definition, it almost sounds like to be a good Christian, you have to allow for some incorrectness. Because that is exactly what you will be tagged as. But while all of this sounds great, what we also have to confess is that being bold isn't easy. Being bold forces me into situations where if I'm going to speak the truth to some people, I have to realize that many of them might turn away. Many of them might come looking for a fight. Many of them might look at me and say, you judge me. And while I sit there and I promise to them that I'm not judging them, but I'm judging their sin, they couldn't care less. Because their sin is their identity. And so if you say something about how I act, you are saying something about who I am. Let me give you an example of this because this is important. If I were a person who is addicted to cigarettes, and I smoke, and I have difficulty in giving it up, and I've tried many times, and I've been smoking for 10, 15, 20 years now. And I turn to my child and I tell him, Habibi, I don't want you smoking. But he sees Baba smoking every day. And I tell him, I don't want you smoking. Would it make sense for my son to tell me, Baba, you're a hypocrite? Baba, you're a hypocrite. You tell me not to smoke and I see you light the cigarette every single day in front of me. And so it's perfectly fine for me to smoke because you smoke. Would that make any sense? Yes or no? Do I understand his emotion, his sentiment? Of course I do. Of course I do. That's like my own father who used to tell me not to scream by screaming at me. Right? Azash! Like, that doesn't work very well. But here is a person who confesses that they are broken. This cigarette has the best of me. Unfortunately, this cigarette controls me. I don't control it. And so I don't want to see you participate in the slavery that I have given myself over to. Does that make me a bad father? Does it make me a bad person to turn to a neighbor, a friend, a brother, a sister, and look at them and tell them, I do not want to see this sin overtake your life? Does it make me a bad person when I turn to another and say, listen, I have my own sins and they are destroying me, but I'm working on them. I'm going to see the great physician who's slowly healing me, and I urge you to do the same. Does the person have the right then to say, until you're perfect, don't speak to me? How does this make sense? Doesn't even a physician go see another physician when he needs to be treated? Can people start demanding of their physicians, when you are perfectly healthy and never go sick, then I will be treated by you? Why do we apply these standards when it comes to the morality of our lives? Why do people fail in understanding that it is not because I am being bold and declaring a statement of truth that somehow that is an attack on you, but that is the things that we deal with, isn't it? For that sake, I want to present you with 4 case studies. Let's begin with the first one. Okay? Now I know we have a variety of different age groups here in the room, so try as best as possible to relate this to something that you would live through. So I might mention a workplace or school. If you don't go to school anymore, just imagine the workplace. If you are already in the workplace, and I mentioned school, just imagine that. Like, try to put yourself in the scenario. But I need you guys to participate. Do we have another mic? Excellent. Will you be the runner? Thank you. Scenario number 1. You are in the work lunchroom. Everybody's taking a break together. You're sitting around the table. People have taken out their lunches. Everyone's eating. The topic that is being discussed around the table, and it just happened organically, is sexuality and marriage. And people are talking about how marriage is absolutely useless, and marriage is nothing, and marriage is this, and it's only a contract, and it's a waste of money and time, and it doesn't make any sense. And people shouldn't get married. People should just move in together. And part of knowing a person is to know them sexually, and so we should give each other over to each other sexually as much as we want. And people are talking about this, and then they turn to you. And then they say, hey, you've mentioned before that you go to church. We've seen you fast before. I think you actually have a tattoo of a cross on your wrist. Right? What do you think about this? What do you think about the topic of sex outside of marriage and whether marriage is necessary? What do we do? I want everyone to be reminded that in this scenario, they've already expressed their opinions. They've already said, it's silly, it's outdated, it's this, it's that, marriage is nothing but this and that, and sexuality has to be expressed at any time with anyone. It's not a problem, it's not a big deal. So, what do you do? Show of hands, please. Here's what I'll do, okay? I'll give you guys about 10 seconds to actually be bold. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to randomly just start pointing at people. Okay? And hopefully that will create discussion. What do you guys think we can do? Yes? And by the way, this is not a time for questions. I want statements. Okay?
I think I would do what Nina Masood did when he was asked the same. I told you I watch a lot of films and things like that.
Who's Nina Masood, sorry?
That's a long story. You'll have to find that out later.
Oh, Aladdin. Yes.
Okay. The whole conversation was like, are you celibate?
Mm-hmm.
So he said, whoa, you're getting, that's too much, that's too full on. Mm-hmm. He avoided it. Whether that would work in a situation like that or not, I have respect for the way he dealt with it. He was able to kind of not answer the question, but at the same time, because it would have been held against him, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't the situation to be talking about celibacy in Egypt and all this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the time. But he was able to turn back at them and say, no, you're crossing a line in a way.
Thoughts?
I think avoiding it can be one option, but I think sometimes if we avoid things, it kind of gives mixed signals as to what we believe and how we practice our faith. So I think it would just be easier to say, well, actually, I believe in the covenant of marriage. I believe it was created and by God, and it has a purpose, and that sex within marriage also serves a purpose. And like sort of, there are also plenty of statistics that back this up as well. So perhaps to research them and then go back and say, that topic we were talking about the other day, this is some other research that I looked into, etc., etc. But yeah, it isn't, I guess, the easiest topic to approach. So shying away, I think, would perhaps be more of a reality.
I think you should avoid it, but if they keep persisting, then you should answer them.
So play hard to get?
Yeah.
So maybe tease them a little bit, say no.
Yeah.
And then when they say no, really, we want to know, then you speak?
Yeah.
Okay. There was somebody here, and then there's... There was somebody there. Yes. Thank you.
Interestingly enough, I found myself in this scenario where everyone was just chatting and talking about their opinions, which were radically different to mine. And I stayed quiet, if I'm honest, when they were talking. I didn't intervene in the conversation until they started pointing to me saying, "Oh, you go to church, so what do you do?" And that's when I'm like, I just said the first thing that came to my head. I'm like, I believe that sex should come after marriage, and that marriage is actually something really beautiful and it's a sacrament. And then end up talking about like the marriage ceremony and end up dwelling, and it sort of set a precedent between me and them. That just for me, just talking about how much I choose to do this, it sort of expanded the topics that we talk about. So anything that they'll have an opinion on, now we've sort of gone on to other topics, saying like, so what about you, Hannah? So do you believe in creation or evolution? You know, it's sort of like set a precedent between me and them in a good way. I don't know how, but yeah.
There's somebody back here and then we'll come to. Oh,
sorry. I think just my opinion is that sometimes people believe that marriage is, outdated, or they don't want to do it, or because they don't see a good example of marriage in this day and age. Unfortunately, in the society we live in, divorce is very common. Relationships are broken. Adultery and cheating on your spouse is quite common. So then why would you think marriage is a good thing if you don't see a good example of it? And I think this opportunity is a beautiful example of how you can show them that actually marriage does work, and you have examples every day in church of how a marriage can be beautiful and how two people can be one in Christ. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to show them another example of how it can work when done right. And I think to be quiet about that, you're denying them the opportunity to see that there is another example out there.
I was going to agree with the last two. In the case when I was put in the situation, we tried to divert the subject to commitment. Like the fact that people don't want to get married is the problem of they don't want to commit to a specific person, that they're afraid of getting stuck, so to speak, and they just want to try out their options. And so it's a completely different problem in the background that's playing around. But I think the two people who spoke before me expanded on that already.
Yeah, pretty much similar to what was said, but I would kind of steer the conversation in a way that you make the people think of it in a different way and make them think of their situation, rather than just stating, oh, I do X, Y, and Z because I believe in God, so they're not going to listen to that, they're going to tune out. Whereas, without specifically saying to them, so you've had multiple sexual partners, how's that worked out for you? Obviously it wouldn't be that. But it's to get them thinking in that kind of way, without obviously being that sassy. I'm not that sassy in her. So but if you so to get them kind of thinking, right, well, someone mentioned the commitment issue as well. That was...
Well, I was just wondering, with the way you asked the question, there was two parts to it. So I guess the precedent was set that people have expressed their opinion, and part of it they were asking for your opinion. So I guess I'm maybe comforting myself by thinking that actually I just want to share my opinion, like they share their opinion. But there's another part of the question, the way you presented, that I'm not just representing my opinion. I'm representing my opinion as a member of the church Christian community, and therefore I'm no longer at ease at expressing my own opinion, because I could defend my own opinion based on my own thoughts. I'm now almost found myself forced to defend my opinion based on the religious background and the teachings of the church, and this is where I certainly get a little bit weak, because I can defend my opinion about a decision I made at work or a choice I made at home or whatever. But if I make a choice based on my faith and I'm not strong enough to argue that element of faith of why I made that choice, that's where it gets really challenging.
I think sometimes it depends on like the way that it's asked. So if it's like general conversation and they're genuinely interested in your opinion, it's a bit easier to kind of say, well, this is my opinion and these are the reasons. But sometimes you're asked in a way as if they're wanting you to say your answer so that they can kind of maybe laugh at you or mock you or in a way kind of make you like an outcast. And then it becomes a wee bit more difficult and uncomfortable. So I think it just kind of depends on like the environment.
I think you're right, it does depend on the environment. But I think many of us are too blinded by fear. So while I agree with you that yes, it does depend on the environment, I think many of us are so blinded by our own fears and anxieties of how we will be perceived that I'm too quick to say they're not ready to take it. What I'm really saying is that I don't want to share. Because I'm reacting out of fear and anxiety. I'm reacting to the possibility of bullying. And so because of this, I hesitate. But if I do know the people, and these are the people that I have lunch with every single day, and it's in the work lunchroom, and I know that they've heard my opinions about a variety of different things before, and if they come seeking my opinion and saying, hey, what is your opinion? We know that you are Christian, you are this and that. I think this might be an opportunity. Where I think we have to get better at identifying is at what point to stop the conversation. Because once I share my opinion, if somebody gets up and says, okay, so you think we're all sinners, that's when I have to realize, okay, well, I don't remember ever saying that statement. I'm not sure how you interpreted that, but very clearly you're not happy with what I said. If anybody wants to know about my opinion, you can talk to me about it later. But clearly right now there's no point in continuing. So it's okay to stop at certain points. But I actually want to identify something very important in this case study. Notice how it is that in this one, I asked specifically that the people are asking you what's your opinion. This is not the same as somebody who's overhearing a conversation, right? And they step in and they say, excuse me, I just heard you guys talking about something. I want to let you know, this is sinful. This is wrong. However, those are not the kind of evangelists and preachers and apostles that the Lord needs. He doesn't need you outside picketing and saying we're all going to hell. That's not the purpose of Christianity. Christianity doesn't go knock on people's doors and say, you're a sinner. You're a sinner. Your mother's a sinner. That's not the point. But if they come seeking the truth, and you know that the Spirit dwells within you, then by all means, be bold enough to be able to say, from what I was taught and what my faith has taught me, it is sacred for this and this reason. And they might catch you off guard. They might say, okay, so what makes marriage a sacrament? What makes it holy? What's the difference between sex after marriage and before marriage? And you might not know the right way in answering that. And do not hesitate to say that's a really good question. Let me find out. If you're really interested, I'd be happy to share it with you. Begin the dialogue, and you have no idea how far it will go. Let me share. I think in this specific example, what we learn is that we need a spirit of meekness and discernment. Meekness here is where a person chooses to be gentle, to be humble in their approach, where they can be approachable. And discernment, specifically because of what was brought up by one of our sisters at the back, this whole idea of identifying whether or not the people are ready to hear. In the book of Philippians, chapter 1, St. Paul says, and this I pray that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and in all discernment, that you may approve the things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ to the glory and the praise of God. There is this monk from the 6th and 7th century by the name of St. John Climacus. He wrote a very popular book among the monks that are called the Ladder of Divine Ascent. And the Ladder of Divine Ascent has all of these different virtues that a person is supposed to grow in. And then he comes on this very specific virtue of meekness, and he says the following: meekness is the bulwark of patience, the door, indeed the mother of love, and the foundation of discernment. What does this mean? If I'm speaking to the people that I'm speaking to with arrogance, with pride, with a greater than thou kind of attitude, I will never be able to show them love. I will never be able to invite them to meet Christ, because that's not who Christ is. Did Christ go sit with the Samaritan woman at the well and then ask her the question, go bring me your husband? And when she says, I don't have a husband, did his response was, aha, I knew it, you're a sinner? No. He finds something to praise her for. This is the same Christ who deals with Zacchaeus, with Levi the tax collector, with Peter, who clearly has anger management issues. He deals with all of these broken people, but he deals with them in love. If I don't have this meekness and this discernment, I won't be able to go very far while being bold. Second scenario: dealing with an accusatory colleague. A person who likes to point the finger. A person who gets offended quickly. So, here's the scenario. You are a physician that works at a large clinic among other physicians. A colleague overhears you speaking with another Christian colleague concerning your views on abortion. And so this colleague lashes out at you and states that as a man, you have no right to an opinion regarding what a woman does with her body, and that you should do as you are told. Thoughts?
Only doctors.
I think sometimes in this situation, if they're really angry, then they're not really receptive to what you're going to say. So sometimes it's best to just say, to nod. And then maybe, if they do seem a bit quiet, to say, this is my belief. But at the same time, you have to assess whether or not they're going to continue being angry and fiery. Because otherwise, they're just going to carry on no matter what you say to them.
Okay.
So I know for a fact that in this circumstance, as a physician, you have the right to not partake or participate in abortion clinics. So I'd firstly apologise and say, I'm sorry that you are angry, but I do know that actually I do have the right to be able to leave myself away from participating in abortion, because that is my views, full stop.
Mm-hmm. How are we supposed to be bold in this situation? Because I've heard it's clearly not the right time, maybe let her cool off and we'll see where it goes later. And I've also heard I'm sorry that you feel this way. I'm just coming from this opinion. How can we push this even further? How can we still be polite and loving and humble, but still be bold? I want you to push the envelope a little bit further. Where Christ demonstrates to us that it's perfectly okay for us to be assertive. For us to say, your treatment towards me is not acceptable.
When he was slapped.
Sorry?
When he was slapped.
When he was slapped. Very good. Listen to this. John chapter 18. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand. These things that he is speaking about is that the high priest was clearly asking him, are you the Christ, the Son of God? And his answer was, I am. I am. And in the process of that dialogue, the high priest was so offended that at some point the officer turns around and he slaps Jesus. He slaps Jesus across the face. Jesus doesn't take it silently and lower his face and does nothing. Neither does he snap his fingers and suddenly a legion of angels come and destroy the guy. But listen to the response. The man slaps him with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" And Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken evil, bear witness of that evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Why do you strike me? If I have said anything wrong, please tell me what is wrong. But if there is nothing wrong with my statement, why this reaction? Why this tone? Why this anger?" We should have the boldness to be able to speak in the same way, with humility, with love. But we must be able to do these things, to have the conviction that, listen, we can disagree. But to suddenly make the statement that I am this and that for having this and that opinion, there's no room for that. Because you would never allow me to do that of you. So why do it to me? St. Cyril of Alexandria, he's commenting on how it is that we can learn from the Lord Jesus. And in his commentary on the Gospel of St. John, he says the following: "When a brother happens to have words with us and lets fall some troublesome expression," he's basically saying, your brother cusses you out. Okay? "We often think that we are justified to be enraged with the fury of dragons and ceaselessly pelt him with a storm of words in return for one." This is St. Cyril of Alexandria, a great patristic father. And he's describing what happens within all of us, where if one person calls me one bad name, I suddenly feel like I should unleash like the fire of hell on him. We neglect to grant forgiveness to human littleness, or to consider the frailty of our common humanity, or to bury the passions that arise in brotherly love. We neglect to look like Jesus himself, the author and the perfecter of our faith. Our responsibility is not to return anger for anger. Our responsibility is not to look at that colleague and say, "How dare you speak to me like that?" Our responsibility is not to suddenly belittle this person and tell them, "Excuse me, me and her were talking, who are you?" That's not the reaction that it should be. And I should be asking myself truly, why is this person so hurt by this? And you would be so surprised how much brokenness people are carrying. We had this young woman in the community that we serve, who always used to have very, very strong opinions on this very specific subject of the rights of women and the whole idea of abortion, all of those things. And we couldn't have the conversation around her because she would sabotage the conversation. She would jump up and take over the conversation and turn it into a huge like human rights movement kind of thing. When we made the mistake of saying the word, and everything would go completely derailed. And then just recently in the series that we're doing about answering some of the questions that youth have, we made a video on Coptic Orthodox answers on abortion, where the church stands on it. After we released the video, I got a message 3 days later, a personal message, saying, "Thank you for saying what you said. I am now ready to talk about the 2 abortions I had when I was a teenager." When the person actually couldn't stop the video and scream back at it. When she couldn't interrupt it and was forced to listen. She heard something that she hadn't heard before. And now she was ready to sit down with a priest and to confess and to let go of this pain and this brokenness that she was carrying. And obviously, as the church, as the image of Christ here on earth, she was received with open arms and she was reconciled back to God. And you should see, she's a completely different person. Completely different person. We don't know who we're dealing with. We don't know the brokenness that people are carrying. Our responsibility is not to judge and to say, "It's." Our responsibility is to realize that in speaking the truth sometimes is like ointment on an open wound. It hurts. It's not pleasant. And we have to bear with the person who's incapable of receiving that ointment. Physicians who work in an emergency room scenario, or that kind of reality. Sometimes the patients will fight them off. And all the doctor is trying to do is help them. All the doctor's trying to do is to heal them, to stop the bleeding, or to save their life. But we have to bear with the fact that this person might be going through something extremely traumatic. We have a responsibility, not just to be bold, but to continue to be human. Scenario number 3. Disapproving of a family member's lifestyle. Disapproving of a family member's lifestyle. A family member decides that there is nothing wrong with their lifestyle of smoking and drinking and occasionally recreational drugs while they are married and have a newborn. They say that it's not hurting anyone and that they know their limits. Their spouse turns to you for help. Again, a family member decides that there is nothing wrong with their lifestyle of smoking and drinking and occasionally doing recreational drugs while they are married and they have a newborn. They say that it's not hurting anyone and that they know their limits. In the meantime, their spouse comes to you and says, help. What do you do?
Would you perhaps speak to the spouse that's doing the drugs and drinking and smoking? Like talk to them about, like in detail, what they do, like how, when, where, and what, and then create some sort of platform where they feel like there's no judgment in here, and then maybe let them know, like, you know, your spouse is looking for help. So are you sure it's not helping? It's not hurting anyone?
Okay. Someone at the back. Still hard to get.
I'd say they're doing it for a reason. So I asked them why they're doing it and try and help them, like, the reason why they're doing the drugs and those kind of things, and try and cut it at the source, not at the problem.
I think the first thing you have to do is to let the partner know that that's unacceptable, that it's not okay for the other spouse to be doing that around the child, and it's not fair on the child, and it's not, firstly, it's not fair on the child, it's not fair on the other spouse, and it's not fair on the person themselves. So I think the first thing you have to say is that this is not acceptable. Like, for this behaviour to keep going on, it's not excusable. And then to go on, you know, try and find out the reasons and try and kind of help.
Up here? Up here? And we'll go back to the guy next to Mark. George.
Abuna, if you don't mind, I'm asking, on what basis is the spouse asking me to intervene? Am I an Abuna, or in this particular scenario, or am I just a family friend, or am I just a stranger? Because interfering in things like that is, like, I can go to the husband and he's like, excuse me? I'm assuming it's the husband. You know what I mean? Like, you never specified what basis am I intervening on as a friend.
The only thing you know is that you're a family member, right? That's what's written. Disapproving of a family member's lifestyle. All you know is that you're a family member. I never said if you're a brother, father, mother, cousin. Doesn't matter. Somebody came to you and said, can you interfere? And you're a family member.
I'd do what my son said. I would find the root of the cause.
Oh, is that your son in the back?
Yes.
Okay, alright. Okay, there was George, and then we'll come back up here.
Yeah, for me on this point, I mean, this is what I would do myself is, you know, I would just be there as a listener at first, you know, showing them that you're trying to support them by listening. You know, you want to hear from them. But as far as how to intervene, that may or may not be, it's really touching on the question that you brought up. Are you a physician? Are you an engineer? Are you just what is your background? How can you lend support? Well, the best way is to be a great listener, first off, and secondly, find that help, the professional help that actually knows what to do. If you don't know what to do, please don't do anything at all. So that's where I stand on that point. I think showing that lending support to that person, letting them know that you are there for them in whatever capacity, and that you'll stand with them through the process. I think that's the most important contribution that you can make.
I was going to say, similar to George there, that with regarding spouse coming to you, it's kind of showing you a level of trust in you as a family member, but you as an individual. So in this case, husband and wife or husband, wherever it may be, coming to you, it's going beyond that barrier and coming to you and saying, okay, in my marital home, I'm coming to you to ask you for advice. You may not even be married, and you're still coming for you to give them advice. So in this case, the wife is actually, or the husband, it doesn't specify, but in this case, they're trusting you to realize that they are concerned for their spouse as well. So to acknowledge that there's concern there, but equally, look at the things that they could have potentially have tried or not have tried that could help them along the way. So it doesn't kind of disrupt the sacred aspect of marriage and the closeness that there should be between man and wife, but equally giving pointers and ideas that can also help them as well.
Okay, so I want you guys to pay attention to the small details of the case studies I'm presenting to you. At some point, the spouse says that they believe there's nothing wrong with what they are doing, and besides, what does he say? I'm not hurting anyone. Boldness always comes at the level of expressing a truth. Okay? What is the truth of the matter here that has to be expressed boldly? There are people being hurt. Case and study, your spouse came to see me. And she's the one who told me to speak. While you might believe that this is only impacting you, and maybe that might be your motivation for not stopping, you need to know that there are other people who are being affected by this. Now, I do agree, you might not be the person who actually counsels them through the level of therapy. And please, again, like as holy and as wonderful as you might be as a person, if you're not a licensed professional, just don't touch it, right? Your responsibility is to hand them off to somebody who can help. They might need spiritual therapy, they might need psychological therapy, they might need addiction therapy, 1,000 different things. But your responsibility is to have them acknowledge the fact that there is a truth that's being neglected, and that truth is that you're not only hurting yourself. As a family member watching you do this, I'm hurting. Your child will hurt, and your spouse is already clearly hurting. But we must have the boldness to not sit there and say that, this is between you and your husband, and then we start saying things like a family is a sacred thing, and what happens in the home should remain in the home. What you're really saying is, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. But we have to be bold if we cared about people. We have to be. But for us to do that, sometimes it means that we have to live an exemplary life. That we have to be wise in our approach. St. Antony the Great, in his life, recorded by St. Athanasius, everybody's hearing about this person who goes into the wilderness and he's doing all of these incredible things and he's preaching with a tremendous amount of wisdom, but the philosophers of Greece think that this man is illiterate. They think that he is unlearned. Why? Because he doesn't speak or write Greek. Because he's only Egyptian and only speaks and writes Coptic, they think that anybody who doesn't know the Greek of the times is illiterate. And they're so shocked that a person who is not educated can speak with this kind of wisdom. And so they go to see him. Listen to what's written. And Antony also was exceedingly prudent, and the wonder was that although he had not learned letters, he was a ready-witted and sagacious man. At all events, 2 Greek philosophers once came, thinking they could try their skill on Antony. And he was in the outer mountain. And having recognized who they were from their appearance, he came to them and said to them by means of an interpreter, "Why, philosophers, did you trouble yourself so much to come to a foolish man?" And when they said that he was not a foolish man, but exceedingly prudent, he said to them, If you come to a foolish man, your labor is superfluous. But if you think me prudent, become as I am. For we ought to imitate what is good. And if I had come to you, I should have imitated you. But if you to me, become as I am, for I am a Christian. But they departed with wonder, for they saw that even demons feared Antony. I want to urge you, the greatest influence you can have on the people who surround you is not by speaking. It's not through words. It's by living an exemplary life. There's a saint from the Eastern Church by the name of Saint Seraphim of Sarov. The saint used to live in the monastery, not in the monasteries, but in the forests of Russia. And you know how we have Amba Barsum Ilagan, who had a pet snake? Well, Saint Seraphim had a pet bear. Okay? A big Russian bear. And the big Russian bear would come and keep him company. He would come keep him warm at night, and he would eat out of his hand. Saint Seraphim of Sarov said the following. He says, if one person acquires the spirit of peace, 1,000 souls around him will be saved. If one person acquires the spirit of peace, if you want to begin to have an influence, it won't be through your words. The same way that I can stand here and talk to you all day about how lovely Jesus is, but if you see me speaking badly to people, if you see me being hypocritical, if you see me not putting into practice what I'm preaching, if you notice that it doesn't match my lifestyle in the way that I speak, in the way that I act, in the way that I think, then you're going to call me a phony. You won't learn or receive anything from me. It is not in the words. It has to be in the life as well. Last case study and then we'll end here. Case study number 4. Addressing a conflicting opinion to a friend. Addressing a conflicting opinion to a friend. A good friend tells you that they are in a serious relationship with someone that is of another faith. And they see nothing wrong with staying with that person as long as they are both willing to respect each other's religion. Again, a good friend tells you that they are in a serious relationship with someone that is of another faith, and that they see nothing wrong with staying together if both are willing to respect each other's religion. Yes, back here, please.
Being put in that position, in that situation myself, the first question that was raised is, what becomes of your children? Like, you respect her faith, she's respecting your faith, but what kind of a divided personality do you want your children to come up being raised in a house, not knowing who they belong to or what their identity is? So
you want them to think about the potential situations that this will lead to. Okay? There's one over here.
I think I would just ask one serious, important question, is what is the goal of your relationship? What is the goal of being with someone? And if that goal is not the right one, then there's a problem, and if you don't have the same goal, then that is another problem. And so ideally the goal should be salvation. And if this person that you're going to be uniting to is not going to lead you there, then why are you with them? Is it just because you enjoy their company, you really like them? Is that enough of a reason to be with someone?
Would I too have come across a situation like that? And it was 2 individuals from 2 different faiths, and they had their arrangement, and it worked for them for quite a while. And what I found out through what that individual came and shared with me later on was that it's because they both were not as committed to their individual faith to start with, that was an okay arrangement. And it's when one of them started to become more committed to his or her faith that they started to put pressure on the other individual to make a change. So in a sense it worked, while as that arrangement would continue to be in place. And that arrangement was only able to be in place when both individuals were not that bothered with it. And it's when one of them starts to have a little bit more interest in their own individual faith that they will start automatically to put pressure on the other individual to make a change. and the relationship did break down, and that person was quite devastated with it, actually.
Back there?
I think it's quite important to kind of come from a place of love as well. So like, this is your friend, and I think it's easy to come across as being like, okay, this is bad, you should do it, like, end it. But I think that if someone's in that position, I think they want someone to know that kind of your friend is there for you and your friend wants the best for you. So yeah, just so that they don't feel that they're being maybe judged or maybe you think you're higher than them or something like that. So that like they have like, basically they feel free to actually explain everything to you and like also like take what you have to say into consideration.
As a friend, there's only so much you can do. So maybe just warn them, but there's a good chance they won't listen. But even if they don't listen, they'll still learn from their mistakes. And that's the best way.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah?
This is a fictional scenario, right? So why the assumption of they probably won't listen?
Just most people, when they think they're in love, they're not going to listen to people around them. They're just going to listen to themselves. So even if I'm their friend, they still won't think. They'll be like, oh yeah. They'll like hear it, but they won't really understand it. Do you get me?
I do get you.
So even if they hear it, they might not accept it, and they just have to learn from.
So what do we do? What do you think we should do? If there is a 90% chance that they're going to reject it, is it still worth saying that they will reject what you're saying? Is it still worth saying?
Yes.
Okay.
But if they don't take what you say into consideration,
how old are you?
14.
14?
Yeah.
She wants psychology.
If they don't take what you say into consideration, then you can't do too much, but either way they'll learn from their experiences and they can use that in the future with future relationships.
Can I say something about this point? Because I have a really big difficulty with they're going to learn from their experiences, right? I used to think like this until I had children. And then I realized some of the things that my children want to experience could lead to death. They don't get it. They don't get it, right? And so you're like, I'm all for the idea of learn from your experiences, right? But when it's issues of like, I might burn the 3 layers of skin that I have on my hand, or I might kill my sister, right? This is not things that I'm willing to let them learn through experience, right?
Yeah.
So the real question is, do I myself see an imminent danger in what is happening?
Yeah, it depends on the severity of it. If it's, you said it's serious, but it depends how long they've been going out, and if when you see them together, do they look like they'll last long, or if they...
When you write your book, I want a copy.
Thank you.
Yes.
أنا آسف، أنا ممكن أتكلم بالعربي؟
ممكن طبعا.
بس عشان أوضح الفكرة أكتر، يعني أنا الموقف ده تعرضت له مرتين. من يعني ديانات مختلفة، كان الفكرة كنا بنحكي هما مش يعني بره فكرة الدين، فحكيت معاهم على أساس اللونج تيرم إيه اللي هيحصل لما كل واحد يتنازل شوية عن مبادئه الدينية بسبب إن هو، والمواضيع دي بتحصل كتير جدا في الجامعة. أنا لسه في جامعة، أنا مخلص جامعة.
أنت لسه في جامعة ولا مخلص جامعة؟
يعني أنا حاليا طالع من الجامعة لسه متخرج.
طب مش ربنا.
فالقصة دي كتير أوي. كل واحد بينازع عن مبادئه عشان أعجب بحد معين بمعلوماته عن كذا، بمعلوماتها عن كذا. شوية اهتمام في موضوع عدو بعض. فكان الارجيومنت اللي هو واحد تنازع عن مبادئه في الدين، فاللونج تيرم لما ينبهر بحد تاني بسهولة جدا يتنازل عنك أنت شخصيا. يعني أنا بوظت الموضوع معاهم، فأعتقد إن الموضوع نجح.
So the scenario that was presented, just to make sure that everybody followed along, is that sometimes what will happen is that the two people who want to be in this relationship, what they will do is that they will let go of some of the principles and the morals that they have in regards to their own faiths, right? they will let go of things, they will not take things as seriously in order to make way for this relationship to work out. And forgive me, Ismail? Yusuf. What Yusuf was saying is that eventually what you have to do is to have them realize that the more you let go of these principles, the more you loosen or you redefine things as you wish, the more you're giving permission to the other person to now redefine you. And in the process, not take you as seriously because you've literally lowered the standard by which you adopt an identity. Very good. Thank you. Yes?
What I believe in, once they're asking for help, it means, or for an opinion, it means that themselves they believe that there's something wrong. So I was just pointing that out.
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't ask for an opinion for something you already believe in, because if you believe in and if you actually don't need an approval for anyone, you wouldn't ask. But you're asking, then you know that's wrong.
Let me make a statement because I think this is important. We throw around the word friend today as if it has no meaning. According to Facebook, I have like 2,300 friends. But when I'm stuck on the side of the road in the middle of the night, I can really only think of about 3 people who would actually get up and help me. There's a problem there. We're throwing around the word uselessly. We think that just because I recognize your face, forget your name, don't need to know your name, but if I recognize your face, friend me. And that's where it ends. Here I'm talking to with a person that you supposedly love. Let me ask you a very different question. If they were crossing the street and they weren't paying attention and a car was about to hit them, would you jump and try to push them out of the way? Yes or no? If the answer to that is yes, why? Because there's a danger there that you want to save them from. A danger that could lead to death or serious injury. So do you really believe in eternity? Do you really believe in the kingdom of God? Do you believe that there is a heaven? Do you believe that there is no way to the kingdom except through Jesus Christ? You believe in this, and you say that you love this other person, and you're willing them to go down this path, which according to your beliefs is going to lead to eternal death. What love is this? What love is this? You call yourself a person who loves me, but you're willing to leave me in this state. That's like a person who's crossing the street and the car is coming to kill them, and you're thinking, well, I don't want to infringe my rights on. I'd rather ask their opinion first. Can I save you? None of us would do this. Do we acknowledge the immediate danger or not? Because if we don't, then we don't love each other. We don't love each other. The book of Ephesians says that we should no longer be children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men and the cunning craftiness and deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love. May we grow up in all things. There has to be room for hope, but the truth has to be spoken every time. The truth has to be spoken every time, and the person has to see in you a person who is more concerned for them and their salvation than anything else. Please don't forget, this is how we'll conclude, that the Lord that we worship, the icon that is set before us as who we're supposed to be, was willing to deal with sinners where they are. When he met the sinner woman who was thrown at his feet, he didn't deny the fact that she was a sinner. What he told everyone else is, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. He didn't get up and tell them she did nothing wrong. Mentor, you're not perfect either. He didn't say any of those things. They told him, according to the laws of Moses, we should stone her. What do you say we do? He said, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And when they all left, he walks up to her and he tells her, where are those who accuse you? Where are those who search to stone you? She answers and says, they have all gone, Lord. And his response was, neither do I condemn you. Go and what?
Sin no more.
And sin no more. So what I'm doing is sin? Of course it's sin. but I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. He meets with Zacchaeus, and he could have completely ignored him. He could have even pointed at Zacchaeus in the tree and told everyone, look, a chief tax collector, a person who takes from his brothers and sisters their hard-earned money, a thief who takes from thieves, a person who has betrayed his own nation and sold them out to the Roman Empire, who takes your money and spends it on himself. He could have said all of those things and it would have been true. But instead, what does he do? Zacchaeus, come down. The party's at your house tonight. And he goes and he dines with Zacchaeus. And we have no idea what he tells Zacchaeus. The gospel doesn't say it. All we know is that by the end of it, Zacchaeus stands up and he says what? Everything I have taken that was unlawful, I will restore fourfold. And everything I possess, I will give to the poor. Literally, Jesus Christ bankrupted him. And the man was happy to do it. The final example is Christ and the Samaritan woman at the well. You know what's interesting is that if you read the passage, you realize that this woman knows Scripture. Because she's speaking to him and she's talking about how, according to you Jews and us Samaritans, and this is the well of our father Jacob, and she knows the history, she knows the tradition. And she says there will come a time when we will come and people will worship on this mountain, and Christ deals with her. So we're dealing with a woman who knows the faith. But he builds her up and he tells her, if you knew who you were speaking to, you would ask of me water. And when he tells her, go get your husband, and she confesses that she doesn't have a husband, he praises her. When he had every right to take her and wipe the floor with her. You're right, you don't have a husband. Because the 5 guys you're with, they're not your husbands. And the guy you're currently with, he's not your husband. And I knew all of these things, and I still spoke to you. You see how righteous I am? None of this. He praises her for her honesty. And so then, the woman who was avoiding the people by going to the well alone, goes into the city and says, come. All of you come. And meet this man who has told me everything I have ever done. What we don't know is that this sinner woman becomes a great martyr in the church. She goes by the name of Saint Fotini. Saint Fotini later becomes not only an evangelist with the apostles, but she actually ends up giving her life over. And she is a martyr in the church. Because one person loved her enough to speak the truth and to inspire hope. This is what we are called to be. We are called to identify the sin without condemning the sinner. We ought to love everyone who sins, because we need to be loved, and we ourselves are sinners. But to stand there and say, I will not condemn, lest my brother thinks I'm speaking of him, la yahweh. We need to be bold. Christ was bold, and through his love, he won us over. To him be all glory now and forever, unto the ages of all ages. Amen.